Welcome to Murder by Nature, where we discuss true crime, mystery disappearances, and unsolved cases. I'm Jasmine Hernandez, your host. I want to thank you guys for listening and being a part of this community. This last 2 weeks, we have skyrocketed up in listeners and views, which is absolutely insane. I know a lot of that has to do with the breaking news in the Anan Saeed case, but I'm not going to lie. When I saw how many people have came and listened to this, I cried just a little bit. So I have a really exciting announcement to make on top of that. Starting October 8th, we are going to be doing YouTube videos. I think I have everything situated and set up, and every Saturday morning we'll release a YouTube video of our case. I'll still put them here, but it will be on YouTube now too, so you guys can go over there and watch it. I'm going to try and do it just like how I do this one, but there may be weeks, especially as we're getting started, that I'm not able to do a YouTube and I'm just doing the audio version of it. But I'm going to try and do it for every Saturday in October starting the 8th, just to kind of kick off spooky season. This month, all of our cases are going to be focused on crimes that were either inspired by murders or things, or crimes that the movies are actually based off of. So stay tuned, because next Saturday is going to be super interesting with the case that we're going to be following, and it will be on YouTube. So as Netflix is starting to release shows, I'm sure a lot of you guys watched the Dahmer one. There's a new one coming out called The Watcher, and I thought that we should jump into that case that kind of sparked this show as the beginning of our spooky season. I'm going to jump right into it because it's going to be a long one. All right, let's jump into our references today. TheCut.com, CNN.com, AllThat'sInteresting.com, Independent.co.uk, NBCNews.com, Reddit, Twitter, Zillow, and sites.psu.edu. So we're going to jump into the case of The Watcher. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. Derek and Maria Broaddus couldn't have been more excited to move into their dream house at 657th Boulevard in the well-to-do town of Westfield, New Jersey. But as the couple was preparing to settle into their $1.3 million home with their 3 children, they received this disturbing note in the mail, signed only The Watcher. The letter had no return address, but whoever wrote it seemed to have been watching them for a very long time carefully. Before the purchase of the Watcher house in 2014, the Broaddus were a fairly average suburban family. Maria Broaddus had grown up in Westfield, New Jersey, just a few blocks away from the house at 657th Boulevard. But on the other hand, Derek had grown up in Maine in a working-class family. But from his humble beginnings, he had worked his way up as a position of senior vice president at a Manhattan insurance company. One night in June of 2014, Derek Broaddus had just finished up an evening of painting his new home in Westfield, and he went outside to check the mail. A white card-shaped envelope was addressed with thick, chunky handwriting, citing the new owner. And there was a typed note inside, and it began warmly. Dearest new neighbor at 657th Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. But as it churns, Derek keeps reading this from his new neighbor, and it says, how did you end up here? Did 657th Boulevard call you with its force within? The letter went on. 657th Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge to watch over it and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It's now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls? Why are you here? I will find out. The letter identified the Broaddus' Honda minivan and the workers redoing the house. I see you already have flooded 657th Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tis, tis, tis. Bad move. You don't want to make 657th Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there's 3 that I've counted. The anonymous correspondent wrote before asking, are there more on the way? The envelope had no return address. It just said, "Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by each day. Maybe I'm one of them. Look at the windows that you see. Maybe I'm in them. Look at the many windows on 657th Boulevard at all the people who scroll by every day. Maybe I'm one of them." The letter even suggested that this wouldn't be its last. "Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin," followed by a signature typed in cursive, "The Watcher." Now, it was after 10 p.m. when he was looking at the mail. He was all alone and he raced around the house, turning off all the lights so no one could see inside. I mean, I would be a little spooked out if I got that. And then he called the police department. An officer came to the house, read the letter, and said, "What the fuck?" He asked, "Do you have any enemies? Or are you, is anyone upset with you? What's going on?" And he told him, "I recommend that you move every piece of construction equipment from the back porch into the house." He said, "You never know. The Watcher may try tossing it in through the window." He seemed super upset that you were redoing your house. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to John and Adrian Woods. That was the couple that they bought the house from. And they asked if they had any idea who the Watcher was or who he might be. Why were they writing? They said that they asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened. That was in the letter. Andrea Woods replied the next morning. A few days before moving out, the Woods also received a letter from the Watcher. The note had been odd, she said, and it made a similar mention to the Watcher's family observing the house over time. But Andrea said that her and her husband never received anything like that in the 23 years that they lived there. And she threw the letter out. She didn't have much thought to it. That day, the Woods went with Maria to the police station, where Detective Leonard Lugo told her not to mention this to anyone, including all of her neighbors, with whom she's never really met, but now they were all suspects in this case. The Broaddus spent the coming weeks on high alert. Derek canceled work trips, and whenever Maria took the kids to the new house, she would yell their names as if they went around the corner. She couldn't have them without her eye view. When Derek gave a tour to a couple on the block, he froze because the wife said, "It's nice to see some young blood in the neighborhood." The Broaddus' general contractor arrived one morning to find a heavy sign that he hammered into the front yard ripped out overnight. 2 weeks later, after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope and called the police. "Welcome again to your new home at 657th Boulevard," the Watcher wrote. "The workers have been busy, and I've been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time they will." The Watcher boasted of having learned much about the family in the preceding weeks, especially about the children. The letter identified the Broaddus' 3 children by birth order and by their nickname, the ones Maria had been yelling. "I'm pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you brought to me," it said. "You certainly say their names often." The letter asked about one child in particular. The writer seemed to have an easel, and it was on the enclosed porch. "Is she the artist of the family? 657th Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It's been years and years since the young blood ran the halls of the house. Have you found any of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I was them. It's far away from the rest of the house, and if you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will they all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedroom facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who's in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All the windows and doors in 657th Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I'm the Watcher, and I have been in control of 657th Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on, and they kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657th Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657th Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy move-in day. You know I'll be watching. As the letters proceeded to grow more sinister, Derek and Maria didn't know how to proceed with the new house that they thought they loved. They decided to halt their move as they grew more anxious about who could be behind these letters. Several weeks go by and a third letter arrives. "Where have you gone to?" the watcher wrote. 657th Boulevard is missing you. Now, many of the Westfield residents compared their town to Mayberry. It's a place where new neighbors greet you. They bring you flowers and goodie baskets. Westfield was about 45 minutes from New York, and it was a bit too slow for singles, meaning that this town had more families than anything. Now, Bloomberg ranked Westfield the 99th richest city in America, but it was only the 18th wealthiest in New Jersey. And in 2014, when the watcher struck, the website Neighborhood Scout named it the country's 30th safest town. Now let's learn a little bit about the house. The house was built in 1905. It is perhaps one of the grandest houses on the block. And when the Woods put it on the market, they received multiple offers above their asking price. This led the Broaddus to initially suspect that the watcher might be someone upset over losing the house. But the Woods said that one of the interested buyers backed out due to bad medical diagnosis. The other one found another house. And in the email to the Broaddus, Andrea Woods proposed something different. It said, "Would the mention of the contractor trucks and your children suggest that it's someone in the neighborhood?" Now, the letters did give an proximity indication. They have been processed in the same postal service, just northern New Jersey. It was posted on January 4th, which was before the sale was made public, and the Woods never put up a for sale sign. This isn't a community where you would have. Only a day after the construction crew arrived, and it said that the renovations were mostly interior, so people who lived nearby, they didn't even notice that it was going on. When Derek and Maria walked Dr. Lugo through the house, they showed him where the easel was on the porch. It was hidden from the street by the vegetation in the front yard, and that made it difficult for someone to see if there was anyone there unless they were behind the house or right next door. Now, a few days later, after the first letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street. It was to welcome them and another new homeowner to the block. The Broaddus haven't told anyone about the watcher. The police instructed them not to, and they found themselves scanning the parties for clues while keeping tabs on their kids, who were just being kids and running around. At one point, Derek was chatting with John Smittet, who lived 2 doors down. Smittet told him about the Lanfords, who lived between them. Peggy Lanford was in her 90s, and several of her adult children, who were in their 60s, also lived with her. The family was a bit odd, Smittet said, but they were harmless. One of the younger Lanfords, Michael, he didn't work, and there's a lot of different accounts about him, but it said that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. Derek thought the case was solved. The Lanford home was right next to where the easel was on the porch, and the family had lived there since the 60s, when the watcher's father and the letter stated that they began observing the house. Richard Lanford, the family's patriarch, died 12 years earlier, and the current watcher claimed that he had been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. When the Broaddus told Lugo about the family, he said he already knew, and after the first letter arrived, he brought Michael in for questioning. Michael denied knowing anything about the letters, but the Broaddus said that the narrative of what he said matched things that were in the letters. Lugo told them that this isn't CSI, and it's not something that, it's him. It has to be him. He's the one that knows. It's his family. But there isn't hard evidence on this. And after a few weeks, a police chief told the Broadduses that short of a mission, there was not much that they can do. This is someone who's threatening his kids, and he was getting furious. How can't they do anything about this? So Derek ended up telling the cops that this is a different situation. They came after my family, and you are going to end up with a different case. Frustrated, the Broaddus began their own investigation. Derek became basically obsessed. He set up webcams. He spent the night crouching in the dark to see if anyone was watching the house at close range. The Broadduses also turned to several experts. They employed a private investigator who stalked the neighborhood, ran background checks on the Langfords, but they didn't find anything. Derek reached out to a former FBI agent and hired Robert, another former FBI agent, to conduct a threat assessment. Robert recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters that pointed that it was an older writer. The letter was addressed to M. Broaddus. They also included the weather, and the sentences had double spacing. This made them think that this was someone that was a little bit older. And also said that there was a lack of profanity, even though the writer was really, really angry, which meant that there was a less macho writer. Robert didn't think that the watcher would actually act on any of the threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to implement that he was certainly mad about it. Now, the watcher was upset about new money moving into town. Robert recommended looking into former housekeepers or their descendants. Perhaps the watcher was jealous that the Broaddus had bought the home and the writer couldn't afford it. But focusing on the Langfords, in cooperation with the Westfield police, the Broaddus sent a letter to Langfords. They announced the plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response. But nothing happened. Detective Lugo brought Michael Langford in for a second interview, but it went nowhere, and his sister Abby accused the police of harassing their family. Eventually, the Broadduses hired Lee Levitt, a lawyer who met with several members of the Langford family and their attorney to show them the letters, along with photos explaining how the house was one of the many vantage points to see the easel that day. The meeting grew tense, and the Langfords insisted that Michael was innocent. There was no other reason to have any suspicion to them. They were honed in on that family. Now, there are another few suspects that it could be. For one thing, the police spoke to Michael before the second letter was sent, which would make it a little risky to send another one. And then there's the rest of the neighborhood to consider. The private investigator found 2 child sex offenders within a few blocks. Bill Woodward and the Broaddus' house painter also noticed something strange. Now, there was a couple that was behind their house, and their lawn faced their lawn. They would have a pair of lawn chairs strangely close to the Broaddus' property, and Bill said that one day he was looking out the window and saw an older man sitting in one of the chairs. But he was facing the Broaddus' house, not his house. By the end of 2014, the investigation stalled. The watcher left no digital trail, no fingerprints, and no way to place someone at the scene of the crime that could have been hatched from basically any mailbox in northern New Jersey. Because he used the U.S. Postal Service, there was no camera that could have caught him, nothing. The letters continued to be read closely for possible clues or a dismissal of the nonsense of rambling of a sociopath. It's like it was trying to find a needle in the haystack, Scott Crowers said. He began helping the investigation from the prosecutor's side in December, and the Westfield Police Department told them there was no other options at this point. Now, the renovations to 657th Boulevard were finishing within a few months, and the family had to decide, will they move into the house that they once loved? Derek priced out trained German Shepherds. He posted a job on a website for military vets. He just wanted someone to come be at the house. The Broadduses had, it's the best way I can describe it is he was trying to hire anything and everything just to be in this house. And the Broadduses didn't buy the house to feel like it was a bunker for a fortress. Derek had been responding to casual alarms at the house, sometimes in the middle of the night, bringing a knife with him just in case. Bill Woodward, the painter, said that he's a stranger, but oftentimes Maria was crying and shaking in his arms. And it didn't help because the watcher seemed to be getting more and more unhinged from this. Another note read, 657th Boulevard is churning on me. It's coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it's my enemy. I'm in charge of 657th Boulevard. It's not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring me young blood back. 657th Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep. Stop changing it. Leave it alone. Now, the Broaddus sold their older house and moved in with Maria's parents while continuing to pay the mortgage and property tax at 657th Boulevard. They told only a handful of friends about the letters, which left others to ask why they weren't moving in. They would just tell them legal fees. They fought constantly and had to start taking medication to fall asleep. Derek said that he was a depressed wreck, and Maria started seeing a therapist. After a routine doctor's visit, she was asked, "How are you?" And this caused her to burst into tears. Her therapist said that she's suffering from post-traumatic stress that wouldn't disappear until they were able to get rid of the house. 6 months after the letters arrived, the Broadduses decided to sell the home. They listed it for more than what they paid for to reflect their renovations, but a few of the words started getting around town, and gossip became the primary focus for the suburban New Jersey real estate. Rumors already had began, and the house sat empty. One broker emailed saying that her clients loved it, but that there had been so many rumors flying around, ranging from sexual predators to stalkers, and that they needed to know more. The Broadduses ended up sending a partial disclosure mentioning the letters to interested buyers and told the Coldwell banker, that their realtor, that they intended to show the full letters to anyone whose offer was accepted. Several preliminary bids came in well below asking prices, but the Broadduses weren't ready to take such a financial hit, only wanted to share the letters with likely buyers. No one ever got that far, though, even after they lowered the price. A Coldwell agent who hadn't read the letters told them in an email that they were being unnecessarily forthcoming, that one of her friends had an issue with her dog, but she never disclosed. Now, the Broadduses insisted that they didn't want to live like that. They had to live through this, and they couldn't do that to someone else. Derek and Maria thought about what they would have done had the previous owners told them about the letters from the Watchers, the Woods, both retired, and he says that if they would have done that, it may have been different. The Woods said that they never felt like they were being watched, and they didn't really see a need to disclose a letter that was once in 23 years, and that they didn't even lock their doors half the time. But the Broadduses felt like the name alone was admissible enough to merit mention to the new family moving in. And on June 2nd, 2015, a year after buying the house, they filed a legal complaint against the Woods, arguing that the Woods should have disclosed the letter, just like they disclosed the fact that the basement sometimes had water in it. They thought that it was going to be a quiet settlement. Their kids still didn't know about the Watcher, and the lawyer assured them that at most, a small legal newswire might pick up the story. A local reporter found the complaint, which included snippets of the Watcher's of his letters, and after a belated attempt by the Broadduses to steal it, the story went viral. News trucks camped out at 657th Boulevard, and one local reporter set up a lawn chair to conduct his own watch. The Broadduses got more than 300 media requests, but with the advice from a crisis management consult referred by one of Derek's colleagues, decided not to speak publicly to spare the children even more attention. They vacated Westfield and went to a friend's beach house. Eventually, Derek and Maria sat down with their kids, and they had to explain what was going on. They had many questions, but Maria and Derek didn't have any of the answers for them. From a safe distance, the Watchers was a real-life mystery to be solved. Now, as this went viral, commenters were suggesting, why not just get something to check the walls? He says that there's something in the walls, check them. But their home inspector did. And a group of Reddit users obsessed over Google Maps. So in Google Maps, how you can see the street view, it says that there was a parked car and there was a man with a camera in the driver's seat. Now, the range of possible suspects included a jolted mistress, a realtor, high schoolers, people making a horror movie and trying to market it. So many different people. Some people just thought that the Broadduses were wimps for not moving in, and they trolled the internet for this. And that's where it gets hard, because they didn't read the letters. They didn't have to deal with it, but they trolled them. In Westfield, people were on edge. One of the neighbors, she teached piano, and she was at the house behind their house. And she stated after all this came out, one of her students was bawling. She was terrified to walk down the street. At the first Westfield Town Council meeting after the letters became public, the mayor assured the public that the watcher hadn't been heard from in a year, and even though the police hadn't solved their case, their investigation had been exhausted. This was news to the neighbors. They'd never heard from the cops. How can you do an investigation but never hear from the cops? Now, as the story started to pick up attention, Baron Klembliss, he was a veteran detective in the Westfield police, was asked to look at the case. He said that there were victims and that they didn't get the support they needed back then. Baron knew that his colleagues had looked closely at Michael Lanford. According to his brother, Sandy Lanford, like I said, Michael was diagnosed with schizophrenia at a young age. He sometimes spooked newcomers, but no one believed that he was able to write those letters. As Chamberbliss looked into the case, he discovered something surprisingly. Investigators found DNA on one of the envelopes, and it determined that the DNA belonged to a woman. Now, as they decided to look more closely, they saw Abby Lanford, Michael's sister. She worked as a real estate agent. Maybe she was upset. She worked at the local Lord & Taylor, and it is said that Chamberbliss coordinated with a security guard to nab her plastic water bottle during a shift. He said that the DNA did not match. Not after long, the prosecutor gave Derek and Maria some unexpected news. They would not say how, why, or what, but they all ruled Lanfords out as suspects. The Broadduses were stunned. They recently told prosecutors that they planned to file a civil charge against them, and they wonder if maybe they were lying. Now, Sandy Lanford said that his family moved into this house in 1961 and they never caused problems for anything. This guy gets all these letters and now all of a sudden they're the ones that are in trouble. Left without a suspect, the Broadduses reopened their personal investigation. They were still coy about sharing too much information with neighbors because they all remained in this pool, but they were hoping that maybe someone would be able to recognize the writing. From Christmas cards, this was a town that you sent Christmas cards to your neighbors. But the only notable encounter came when an older man who lived behind them said his son thought that he was the watcher. A neighbor across the street was the CEO of Crowell, the security firm, and the Broadduses hired the company to look at handwriting matches, but they found nothing. They also hired Robert Leonard, a renowned forensic person. He was trying to find if there was any overlapping, but there was none. Now, Chamberbliss and Westfield police were back to square one. The cops asked Andrea for a DNA sample and interviewed her 21-year-old son, but nothing came back a match. After a year, it was hard to find fresh leads, and the police that initially canvassed never did it correctly. And it was also found that during this time, another family received a letter similar from the watcher. The parents of that family have lived in their house for years. Their kids were grown, so they just threw the letter out, as the Woods had. But after the news broke, one of their children spoke about it on Facebook and then deleted the post. When investigators spoke to the family, they confirmed that the letter had been similar, but its only existence made the case even more weird. There wasn't a lot going on, Chamberbliss said. One night, him and his partner were sitting in the back of a police car. It was like a van doing surveillance, and it was parked in front of the house. They had binoculars, and they said that around 11 p.m., a car stopped in front of the house long enough for Chamberbliss to grow suspicious. He said that he tracked the car to a young woman in a nearby town whose boyfriend lived in the same block as 657. The woman told Chamberbliss that her boyfriend was into some really dark video games, including one where he played as a character, the Watcher. As for the female's DNA, he figured that maybe the girlfriend or someone else could have helped, but the boyfriend was living elsewhere at the time. He was supposed to come down for an interview 2 separate times, and he never showed. But there was nothing that he can do. There wasn't enough evidence to compel someone to come in, and the media attention was dying down. Chamberbliss dropped the case and moved on. So there is a theory that goes that the Broadduses had buyer remorse, and maybe they just couldn't afford the house and came up with this huge plan. Some of the locals found it noteworthy that over the course of the decade, the Broadduses had upgraded from a $350,000 house to a $770,000 house to a $1.3 million house and then refinanced their mortgage. A few years after the letters became public, the Westfield Leader published an article in which anonymous neighbors were quoted asking why the Broadduses kept redoing the house when they weren't moving in, and quoting whether they really had done that much renovation at all. The leader even cast doubt on his wife's commitment to her family's safety. They said that she had a Facebook page and there's photos of her kids everywhere, but she was scared. The police ended up testing Maria's DNA and it didn't come back a match. Now, none of these made any sense to anybody. So they're just kind of speculating when it comes to this. The Broadduses haven't known their neighbors to be able to have such a reaction to this, but they lived in that area for a decade. Maria's family had been a part of the community for much longer, so it was shocking for them to find themselves accused of being a con artist. To Derek, it seemed like some in Westfield preferred the conspiracy that they were con artists to the actual fact that they can have something going on in their town. While Maria looks back fondly on her childhood, she was born a few years after the Westfield resident John Liss and famously murdered his wife, mother, and 3 children in their home, and remembers a period when Westfield wasn't like that. You couldn't always be safe. They even would describe it that bad things happen everywhere. That was not Mayberry. The Broadduses were used to being outcast, not only from their home, but now from their town. Derek wanted to leave Westfield, but Maria insisted not uprooting her kids. She said, "This person took too much from us. We can't let them take more." 2 years after the initial letters arrived, the Broadduses borrowed money from a family member to buy a new second home in Westfield. They used an LLC to keep the location private, but staying in the town was stressful. Maria remembers letting her daughter go out and not being able to not check on her location or see where she was or what she was doing anymore. Now, in the spring of 2016, they ended up putting the house back on the market, hoping it had garnered more interest given how many people had reacted to the letters by saying that they would have ignored them and just moved in. The Broadduses held a well-attended open house after they spent hours searching every person who signed in and compared their handwritings to the watchers. But each time a potential buyer exposed interest and met them, they went over the letters and backed out. They said that some cocky guy from Staten Island said, "Fuck it, I'm going to get the house at a discount." And then he read the letters and he was never heard from again. Feeling as if they were out of options, the Broadduses' real estate lawyer proposed an idea: sell the house to a developer, tear it down, split the property. See, they thought they can at least get $1 million for the lot. But when they took this to the planning board, they got a whole different result. It had been a 3-hour meeting dedicated just to this issue, and more than 100 residents showed up. One of them who lived across the street and had a daughter in the same grade as one of the Broaddus' kids. They even retained a lawyer to fight the proposal. James Forrest was the Broaddus' attorney and explained that the 3-foot exemption, basically they were wanting to tear it down, but it was 3 feet shy of the mandated one, which is 70 feet. And he said that it was barely as narrow as the display he was using of the map of the neighborhood. And the neighbors expressed concern that the plan might knock down the trees or the new home wouldn't be aesthetically pleasing with front-facing garages. Forrest repeatedly threatened the halfway house as a possible alternative because they were going to let someone use the house for a halfway house. After lawyers paraded of neighbors stood up, and Glenn Dumont, he lived across the street, said this would end the 600 block Boulevard as we know it. A woman whose kids had been to the Broaddus' old home for a birthday party spoke on behalf of 9 neighbors and pressed that 657th Boulevard was a Westfield Alamo. Our neighbors are constantly under attack from turf, lights, parking decks, you name it. If we can't make a stand on the boulevard, where can we? At one point, Abby Lanford stood up and said that she spent 60 years looking at a magnificent, beautiful house and didn't want to be looking at a driveway. The hearing lasted 4 hours when there was no real discussion of the reason why they were trying to tear it down in the first place. No one thought about the repercussions that they were feeling. And it said that Tom Higgs even pointed out that there's no guarantee that the watcher wouldn't send letters to the 2 new houses, arguing that the aesthetic should rule the day, putting 2 houses that are me sticking out like an old client of a man in Texas. He was trying to use some metaphor. And the neighbors expressed their compassion but their focus remained that the Broadduses should still gain financially. What will they lose from this? At 11:30 p.m., the board rejected the proposal. Derek and Maria were distraught. On top of the mortgage and the renovation, they paid around $100,000 in property taxes too. And this town just kept denying their request and denying their relief. They recognized that it was a beautiful home, which is why they went to go buy it. But the Watcher had expressed a desire to protect the Boulevard. And instead, they were being torn apart. Not long after the planning board decision, the Broadduses got some good news. A family with growing children and 2 big dogs agreed to rent the home. The renter told the Star-Ledge that he wasn't worried about the Watcher, that he had a clause in his lease that would let him out if there was another letter. 2 weeks later, Derek went to 657th to deal with squirrels that had been taking up a residence on the roof. The renter handed him an envelope that had just arrived. Violent winds and bitter cold to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife. This letter came out of nowhere 2.5 years after the Watcher disappeared. It was dated February 13th, the day that the Broadduses gave their deposition in the lawsuit against the Woods. You would wonder who the Watcher is. Turn around, idiots, the letter read. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of your so-called neighbors who have no idea who the Watcher could be. Maybe you do know and you're too scared to tell anyone. Good move. The letter was stylish and more wrathful than the others. It seemed like the writer had been closely watching the story and seen the media coverage. I walked by the news trucks when they took over my neighborhood and mocked me. I watched you from the dark house and attempted to find me. Telescopes and binoculars, wonderful inventions. The attempt to tear down the house, 657th Boulevard, survived your attempt and your assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates, the letter read. My soldier from the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out the mission and saved the soul. With my orders, all hail the Watcher. The letter indicated revenge could come in many forms. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you sick after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved one suddenly died. Plane cars and crashes and bicycles, broken bones. The renter was spooked, but he agreed to stay if they installed cameras around the house. Derek took the letter to the police headquarters where the detective looked at the neighborhood, drew a map, and put a circle of the houses within 300 yards, suggesting the Watcher must be there. Derek drew one more closer. In my view, it's one of the 10 houses in the world, he said. They have a new tenant now at 657th, but the rent doesn't cover the mortgage. The kids are basically teased at school, and there's so many rumors going around. The Watcher no longer is the only person sending anonymous letters in Westfield. Last Christmas Eve, several families received an envelope in their mailbox. They were hand-delivered to the homes of people who've been the most vocal in criticizing the broadcasts online. It included several stories of the recent acts of domestic terrorism, which was signs of brewing mental illness that had gone unnoticed. The letters were typed and were signed, friends of the Broadduses family. The family who received these letters didn't know who sent them, but the author of the cut said that the tone was very familiar. He asked Derek Broaddus whether he had written them. He admitted he did, and he wasn't proud of it. He hadn't even tell his wife, and said that there were only anonymous letters that he'd written. He didn't write any more. He felt like he was driven to his ends and fed up with silently watching people throw accusations at his family practically based on nothing. A fourth letter showed up, and it read, "You are despised by the house. The Watcher won." In January of 2019, the Broadduses sold the house on 657th Boulevard for $959,000. Now, my thoughts on this case are very conflicted. I understand why they want to move into their house, but so many years went by because this person decided that they wanted to mess with people, and they've never been caught. That is just mind-blowing to me, especially because I come from a small town, and this is something that we've had in our local town. When I was growing up in high school, we had something called the Watchers, but it was a little different. They lived in a house on a street, and they never left their house. There's a lot of theories that come with it, but children would go to their house and park out front, and they would come out with guns and everything and shoot at cars It's never said why, but our city ended up relocating them, paying for them to move, and they've never been heard from since. So it's a little crazy when I saw the Watcher and I saw that it was another case, because I can relate to that in my normal day too. Now that brings us to the end of this episode. As always, thank you for listening to Murder by Nature. If you enjoyed our show, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any streaming platform that you're currently on, and be sure to come back next Saturday for our new episode. And remember to check out YouTube for our first video. Until then, I'm your host, Jasmine Hernandez. Don't forget to stay safe. Don't get murdered or murder people, you lovely humans. Have a happy Saturday.